Hey everybody, it's Charlie. This is going to be my non-spoilery Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse review. We'll cover the mythology, the world building, because they did confirm that a sequel is being made right now, and there's another Spider-Gwen spin-off that they just confirmed. So once we talk about the actual film, I'll talk a little bit about where they're taking this animated universe. But if you saw the trailers for this movie and you wondered if they would try to do an animated universe of films, it is now confirmed. So if you're brand new to the channel, there's a new round of that Spider-Man PS4 game giveaway. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave a comment on the video. There's so many things that we have to talk about with this film. The visual style, what it does with the characters, how it invokes all previous Spider-Man films. Because if you're a big fan of the classic Spider-Man films and you really love hunting Easter eggs in Marvel films in general, this movie will keep you busy for a long time. It is probably one of the most rewatchable Spider-Man films that I've seen. You may see a lot of critics online calling it their favorite superhero film of the year. I wouldn't go so far as to say that. The year isn't over yet, and Infinity War is going to be really hard to top. But if you're not a big animation geek, the really cool thing that they did is obviously it's all computer animation like Pixar films or the Disney animation films, but they did it in a way that made it feel more like a 2D living comic book. There are a couple of other productions that have tried to do that this year unsuccessfully, but Spider-Verse, I feel like, perfected that technique. And it's a film, so they spent a lot longer trying to perfect that. They spent a lot more money on it. That really comes across on screen. It's a visually very beautiful film, and because it's animation, it's much more precise than a live-action film. It's a lot easier for them to do exactly what they're envisioning in their minds, and that also spills over into the story mythology aspect of the film, because at a certain point, live-action films just become too expensive. Like there was a version of Thor fighting the Midgard serpent in Infinity War that they just had to cut out because it was way too expensive. So because of the sheer multiverse, Spider-Verse aspect of it all, it's probably the biggest Spider-Man film that's ever been made in terms of scope. Andrew Garfield's Spider-Man tried to get there with Sinister Six, never quite achieved that full big world that they were going for. But thanks to the lack of limitations in animation, you hit the ground running with big multiverse storyline in this, without completely drowning out the Miles arc of it all, because it's meant to be his film. And if you've ever read the Bendis Ultimate Spider-Man storyline, they're doing a version of that mixed with the Spider-Verse storyline from a couple years ago, so it doesn't feel like it was that long ago, but the character Miles Morales only debuted in the comics about 7 years ago, so compared to Peter Parker, he just doesn't have nearly as much comic book history to draw from. But the cool thing about including the 40-something midlife crisis Jake Johnson Peter Parker is that they still find a really cool way of giving you those classic Spider-Man deep cuts. So I think the brilliant thing about them including this particular version of Spider-Man is that he gets to be sort of the sweatpants, pizza-loving Obi-Wan Kenobi of the film, so you get to find out what went wrong for him, and you get a Peter Parker arc where he gets his shit together late in life while also helping Miles get his shit together as a brand new Spider-Man. If you've ever seen any other thing that Jake Johnson has done, he's known for playing characters like that. It's just really iconic that he gets to play a version of Peter Parker. The Miles Morales performance was great. I love what they did with that character. You saw Spider-Man Homecoming, so you've seen a very recent example of a high school age Peter Parker that's just trying to balance all the different worlds he belongs to. How do you be a really great superhero without destroying your personal relationships with your friends and family and avoid getting kicked out of school because you're still a little kid that has to graduate like everyone else? Like you have a bright future as a human being, but also as a superhero, and how do you reconcile those two things? So the Miles of this film is even younger than Peter Parker was in Spider-Man Homecoming. So the movie does a good job of differentiating him from Peter Parker because there are certain aspects of their life that seem very similar, but Miles' origin story and his background, the place where he lives, his family, is all very different from Peter Parker's situation. So the writers did a really good job with that balancing act of giving you all this heavy mythology and the really cool comic book stuff like the plot and story of it all without losing sight of the character work and Miles just trying to find his way and learn to forge his own path. Because as a young kid, as you would expect, he has a lot of people that he looks up to and seeks advice from, some of them good, some not so good. On one hand, you have sweatpants Peter Parker trying to tell him, learn from my mistakes, don't do it exactly like I did, be your own Spider-Man, all you have to do is save one person. Then on his other shoulder, he has his uncle, the Prowler, trying to push him in a different direction. Thankfully, the film is not a mess, because when you do really big multiverse stories like this, sometimes it can cause a lot of havoc with the character work, But if you remember that story about Dan Harmon being brought in late in the game during the Doctor Strange movie to punch up the script, recently the other writers revealed that the reason that he was brought in was because of Community and his work on Rick and Morty, not so much for jokes, but because on those TV shows, Kevin Feige and Marvel felt like he does an amazing job of conveying really complex ideas like traveling between alternate realities or the Citadel of Ricks, which itself is based on the Fantastic Four Council of Reeds, conveying all those really crazy complex ideas in fast, really simple, entertaining ways for general audiences. So in the Spider-Verse, the writers do a really great job of conveying all these really complex multiverse ideas in really simple ways. And it just works really well for any audience. So if you're a big Easter egg hunter, longtime Spider-Man fan, you'll love the mythology of it all. But if you're someone that has children or you're taking your parents to the film, it'll work for them too. When the movie actually does hit theaters, I'll do a big Easter egg video, but a lot of the stuff in the film that they do, especially with the Peter Parker character, harkens back to Tobey Maguire era, Andrew Garfield, and some Tom Holland MCU Spider-Man stuff. The way they describe their version of Peter Parker, the Jake Johnson Peter Parker, is that he's meant to be the older iteration of an amalgam of those characters. So you have to imagine that this is like the late 40-something Iron Man in the MCU right now. Like, what would happen to Peter Parker in his late 40s if he were to lose his way? They implied that they were trying to canonize certain aspects of those eras from the Spider-Man films and those storylines, so we can talk more about that when we get to Easter egg videos. Haley Steinfeld was great as Spider-Gwen. John Mulaney was great as Spider-Ham, which was just totally cartoony. In the way that they drew his character was also meant to be more cartoony than the other Spider-Verse characters, just as a way to honor the ridiculousness of that character, because it is crazy that he's on screen with these other characters, even though it is animation. Penny Parker was great, and I cannot say enough about Nicolas Cage. He was born to be in comic book movies, but for whatever reason, things just didn't work out in a lot of earlier roles back in the early 2000s. He's finally getting to do really awesome comic book characters, albeit through animation, and Spider-Man Noir is just a really cool character to begin with. But as you would expect, it's a Marvel-based character film. There is a post-credit scene. Do not leave the theater early. We can talk about what that is when the film actually comes out. But if you didn't see the news, they already started making a Spider-Verse sequel. It'll be led by Marvels. A version of Peter Parker will probably return. Spider-Gwen will probably be back. But beyond that, we'll just have to wait for the film to come out because the end of the film sets up those future sequels like you would expect. So if you've read Spider-Geddon, if you read any of the Spider-Verse comic book storylines, any of that stuff and those characters are fair game for future Spider-Verse sequels. They've also confirmed that there is a Spider-Gwen spin-off film that'll have a whole bunch of other female versions of Spider-Man. So Jessica Drew Spider-Woman, Silk, Madam Web, May Parker Spider-Girl. Penny Parker might return for that as well, but it's meant to be separate from the Spider-Verse sequel. So like I said, a Spider-Verse of animated films, like their own animated version of an MCU with Spider-Man-based characters. So we'll get more details about that really soon. But what'll happen is I know everybody's wondering about Avengers 4 trailer and all the big Marvel MCU stuff that's going on, so I'll have more videos for that posting soon. Leave your requests in the comments below, and I'll name a giveaway winner when I post that new Marvel video. But click here to rewatch that Once Upon a Deadpool trailer that's coming up in December, and click here to learn about what's going on with the Venom sequel. Thank you so much for watching. Everybody stay awesome. I'll see you guys tonight.